The morning of the crash started like any other. Bright, ordinary, full of small comforts I didn't know I was about to lose forever. I remember how my husband, Richard, always checked the luggage twice, how our son Henry teased me for packing too much, and how our little granddaughter Emma tugged at my hand, asking if we'd see the mountains soon. It was supposed to be a family trip, our first since Richard retired. We had dreamed of it for years, a slow train ride through the countryside, the kind with wide windows and soft seats, where the world drifted by like an old movie reel. I had no idea that the same train would become my graveyard of memory. We boarded just before sunrise. The smell of coffee and the hum of sleepy travelers filled the air. Richard sat by the window, his newspaper folded neatly. Henry kept checking his phone. Emma pressed her face against the glass, marveling at the fog curling across the fields. I remember thinking, this is peace. For the first time in years, we were all together, laughter echoing through the narrow aisle. The train moves steadily, cutting through forests, rivers, and villages. Somewhere after noon, the clouds began to gather, thick and gray. The rain came fast, slapping the windows, turning the tracks slick. Still, no one worried. Trains are supposed to be safe. Until they aren't. It happened in a blur, a sound like thunder, metal twisting, screams blending with the roar of wind and rain. The lights went out, the world tilted, my body slammed against the seat in front of me. I remember the smell of smoke, the heat, the glass shattering, and then silence. When I woke, I was lying on the ground outside, the cold mud seeping through my clothes. The train was half buried in the embankment, flames licking the sky. I tried to stand, but my leg screamed in pain. "Richard? Henry? Emma?" No answer, only the crackle of fire and the sound of distant crying. I crawled, dragging my body toward the wreck. Faces blurred past me. Survivors, rescuers, chaos. I searched every face, every broken window. I found Emma's doll beside a twisted rail. That's when I knew. Hours later, they pulled me away, a blanket around my shoulders, a medic checking my pulse, voices murmuring things I couldn't process. Someone said, "No survivors in that compartment." Someone else whispered, "She's lucky to be alive." Lucky. That word burned. For weeks, I lay in the hospital, staring at the ceiling. My body healed faster than my heart. The world outside kept moving, the trains kept running, but I was frozen in that one moment, that sound, that loss. People came. They brought flowers, condolences, promises that time would help, but time didn't. Time only stretched the emptiness wider. Until one day, a stranger walked into my hospital room, a man with kind eyes and a scar across his temple. He introduced himself quietly. "My name's Daniel. I was on the train too." And that's when everything began to change. Daniel became a regular visitor, though at first I wasn't sure why. He'd knock softly, always waiting for me to answer before stepping in. He never brought flowers or fruit baskets like others did, just a quiet presence, and sometimes a small book, its pages worn, as if it had comforted him too many times before. The first few times I didn't talk much. I barely looked at him. The pain of what I'd lost made every conversation feel useless. But Daniel, he never rushed me. He'd just sit in the chair near the window, staring at the rain, as if we both needed silence more than words. One afternoon, I asked him, softly, almost unwillingly, "Why do you keep coming back?" He smiled faintly, touching the scar near his temple. Because I know what it's like to wake up when everyone else doesn't. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he told me about his wife, Clara, and their little boy, Jacob. They had been in the same carriage as my family, only a few seats away. He'd survived because he'd gone to the dining car just minutes before the crash. When he came back, there was nothing left. His voice broke as he said it, and suddenly, for the first time since the accident, I felt something other than numbness. I felt understood. After that, we talked often, not always about the crash, but about life before it. He told me about Clara's love for music, about Jacob's laugh. I told him about Richard's stubborn kindness, about Emma's drawings taped all over my refrigerator. Every story we shared was like building a fragile bridge between two broken islands. When the nurses came in, they'd smile softly, whispering that I seemed stronger. But it wasn't medicine that healed me, it was being seen by someone who carried the same kind of sorrow. Weeks turned into months. My leg mended. The nightmares still came, but Daniel was there in the daylight, a reminder that I hadn't been left completely alone in the ashes. One morning, as we sat in the hospital garden, watching the wind bend the tulips, Daniel said, "You know, Margaret, I used to think I survived by accident, but maybe we're meant to survive for something." I turned to him, the sunlight glinting off his scar. "For what?" He shrugged gently. "To keep the memories alive, to make their love mean something more than pain." That night, I couldn't sleep. His words echoed in my mind. I thought of Richard, of Henry, of little Emma. What would they have wanted me to do? Cry forever? Hide from life? Or live, really live? So their love didn't end with the crash. For the first time, I whispered into the dark, "I don't know how to keep going, but maybe I'll try." It wasn't a promise, not yet, but it was the beginning of one. It had been nearly a year since the crash when Daniel knocked on my door again. I had moved back into our old house, the one Richard and I built, brick by brick, where the echoes of laughter still clung to the walls. I lived quietly now. I tended the garden, I cooked for one, and I learned to bear silence like a companion. When I opened the door, Daniel stood there holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. "You still take it with cream?" he asked with a smile. I nodded, surprised. "You remembered." He chuckled softly. "Hard to forget the only thing that makes you smile at 7 a.m. We sat outside, the sun warming the edge of the porch. He told me he'd been traveling, visiting the places Clara had always dreamed of seeing. "It hurts," he said, "but it helps too. Every time I go somewhere she loved, I feel like she's walking beside me again." He looked at me then, eyes steady. "Come with me, Margaret. Just one trip." I froze. "Oh, Daniel, I'm not sure I can. I haven't left town since—" "You don't have to be sure," he interrupted gently. "Just willing." That night, I sat with the map he'd left behind. It was folded neatly, edges worn from use. The route traced through quiet countryside, the same path the train once took, the same rails that had changed both our lives. My hand trembled as I traced the line. Something inside me whispered, "You can't run from ghosts forever." A week later, I agreed. The morning we left, my stomach churned with fear. Daniel drove, humming softly, his hand steady on the wheel. The road followed the river, winding through valleys that looked like memories. The first stop was a small memorial near the crash site, a plaque covered in flowers, names etched in bronze. I stood before it, reading each letter of my family's names until my vision blurred. I thought if I came here, I'd break apart, I whispered. But I feel calm. He nodded. Maybe it's because they're not here anymore. They're somewhere gentler. We continued driving. The landscape opened wide, fields rolling into the horizon. For the first time in a long time, I noticed how blue the sky was. The clouds looked soft, like the ones Emma used to draw. We stopped by a small lake at dusk. The water shimmered, gold and glassy. We sat by the shore, and Daniel pulled out a small tin box. Inside were letters, folded, faded, each addressed to his wife and son. I write to them, he said quietly, every time I feel lost. I hesitated, then reached into my bag. I'd brought something too. Emma's doll, the one I found by the tracks. I placed it on the ground beside me. I talk to her sometimes. It sounds silly, doesn't it? He shook his head. It sounds human. We sat there for hours, the air turning cool, fireflies flickering like tiny lanterns. For the first time, the ache in my chest didn't feel like punishment. It felt like proof that love still lived somewhere inside me. Before we left, Daniel turned to me. You know, Margaret, maybe healing isn't about forgetting. Maybe it's about learning to carry the memories without drowning in them. His words lingered in the night air, wrapping around me like a soft blanket, and for the first time since that terrible day, I looked toward tomorrow with something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Hope. It had been 3 months since our journey, and the rhythm of my life had changed in quiet, beautiful ways. I no longer woke up to silence that felt like a punishment. I woke to birdsong, to the faint smell of dew on the garden roses. I'd begun walking every morning, something Richard and I used to do. I still took the same route, past the bakery, across the little bridge where Emma once fed the ducks. Some days, the memories stung. But other days, they felt like soft reminders that love doesn't die. It only changes shape. Daniel and I kept in touch, writing letters at first, then calls, then visits. He'd show up with 2 coffees, always just the way I liked, and we'd sit on the porch, sharing silence that didn't need words. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, painting the sky orange and violet, Daniel handed me a small envelope. Inside was a photograph, the lake we'd visited, with wildflowers blooming at its edge. On the back, in his neat handwriting, were 5 words. They'd want us to live. I held that picture to my heart. Something inside me, something that had been frozen since the crash, began to thaw completely. That night, I went to the attic. I hadn't been up there in years. Dust clung to the boxes, the old wooden floor creaking under my steps. I opened one labeled Family Trips. Inside were photographs, postcards, and letters, all the small treasures of a life that once was. I smiled through tears, remembering each moment. Then, at the very bottom, I found a folded piece of paper, Emma's last drawing. A train puffing clouds of smoke and a sun smiling above it. At the top, in her childish handwriting, it said, "Grandma, the train will take us to heaven and back." My breath caught. For years, those words might have broken me. But now, they healed something deep inside. Maybe, just maybe, she was right. Maybe they had gone somewhere bright, waiting for me to live fully before we met again. The next morning, I went back to the memorial. I brought flowers, white lilies for Richard, yellow ones for Henry, and a small pink rose for Emma. I whispered softly, "I'm okay now. You can rest easy." A breeze passed through the trees, gentle and warm. almost like a touch. I smiled through the tears. When I turned, Daniel was standing behind me. "You ready?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes. For once, I think I am." We walked away together, down the path where sunlight filtered through the branches, and the sound of birds filled the air. And I realized this was not an ending. It was the beginning of a life rebuilt from ashes, carried by memory, guided by love. And though I had lost everything that once defined me, I had found something deeper, a quiet courage that whispered, "Even after tragedy, life still blooms."